and gentlemen, welcome to Wrestling Art with Chris Stings.
Ray! Do the hammerlock! I do the hammerlock! Ray! Do the hammerlock, you turkey necks! Yeah, do the hammerlock! I do the hammerlock!
Ladies and gents, we've made it up to, what is this? I don't even know. Episode 9 maybe? Either way, this is a very special one that you've chosen to download to your ear holes today, because this is the highly anticipated return of our Wrestling Art Curator episodes. Yeah, the ones where we talk to rad wrestling artists that are not named Chris Things about their wrestling art, about their practice, about their sort of thoughts on this whole thing, why they do it, all that kind of gas. And man, this is a bloody good one. This week, you probably already know from the episode description, but Jonathan McBurnie is on the show. Just a ridiculously talented artist, writer, comic book art dude. Dude has done lots of solo shows, published in all sorts of fancy shit. But yeah, dude, I'm just so stoked to have gotten the opportunity to chat with. So more of that later. But I'm just so bloody happy with that. Just a lovely conversation about a bit more of like the philosophical side of wrestling art and what it can be and the different themes and all of that and how it sort of fits into sort of like the genre of fine art, I guess. But yeah, super fun stuff and interesting listen. So I hope you guys enjoy that. I also hope you guys had a very Merry Christmas. Yeah, we're just coming out of bloody Christmas the other day. I hope you guys all had a very, very lovely time, a nice break. I had, I'm still trying to do my art things and keep this stuff to a regular schedule, so things have been a little bit hectic, but that's okay. That's okay. I have a fun little story for you, actually. So, last week there was a Christmas themed art show that I was invited to take part in. And I think a big part of my approach to my art practice is say no to nothing, right? I think that's a great way to grow, a great way to continue to challenge yourself and all that kind of stuff. So no regrets there, but maybe on this occasion that approach didn't work out to a very ideal degree because I was invited to this show. Never done a show for this person before, but I think there's something that's a big compliment to your work when you just have someone say, "Hey, I've been following your work for a while. Really impressed with your stuff, man. I've got an art space that I'm setting up, looking to do some art exhibitions. Would absolutely love to have you as part of it." And what are you going to say to that? Other than, yeah, I'm bloody be tickled pink to be part of that. So I say yes to this, and painting up a piece specifically for this art show. This piece in question is actually one that I found a really fun photo that was posted on Twitter by Rob Viper, I think. Rad follow there, would recommend that guy. But this amazing picture of Lucha Libre Arena Mexico mascot mini icon Zacarias El Perico, who is a small sized gentleman in a parakeet mask, I believe. But there was a Christmas themed kind of thing where he had like a Santa hat on, and quite a small-sized speedo that he was wearing, and he was just stretched out on the ramp, looking just as guapo as a small man, creased up Mexican wrestler can look. Just a wonderful photo where I was like, man, I need to bloody do this in art form. Shit. So I arted this up. It took basically a full day for the most part, but I got it done in time. I was happy with it. I think it's a really fun piece. I haven't actually posted that yet, and if I was smart, probably would have got that up before Christmas. But whatever, better late than never. So I'll get that up shortly for you guys if you'd like to check that out. But I bring this along to this mysterious art show. And man, I get there, and this is a setting like no art show I have seen before. It's basically in the backyard of what used to be Asian grocer, and this dude's kind of like kitted it out. Immediately, I got vibes of like rave party kind of setting. I mean, it was kind of cool, but I was like, what am I doing here with a painting right now? Eventually, dude comes up to me, say a couple hellos, and it quickly becomes apparent that no one else has submitted anything painting wise of the different artists that he may have approached here. I am the only one who has a painting to be part of what appears to be a backyard rave. And I don't know, man. Sometimes you're like, this isn't the vibe. This isn't the vibe for my art. And I don't want to offend people, but sometimes you just gotta leave. You just gotta peace out. And so I just kind of took my painting and left. I mean, no offense to the dude. If he wants to put on the future art shows that actually have other artists as part of it, and a bit more of like a art show setting where people are gonna maybe buy some things. So I don't know, but a unique experience that I thought would be a fun one to share with you in the weekly life of Chris Things art. Oh man, so safe to say that that piece did not sell in the show, and I've got the original here, looking all fly on my wall. I think I'll put that up on my website, and if any of y'all are interested in it, you may be able to procure that Chris Things original for yourself. But yeah. Anyway, so we've got a great interview here coming up. So this has delayed our match of the week a little bit, but I'll get that up. I think tomorrow, perhaps, maybe the next day. We'll see how we go with that. But I'll have that up to you shortly. Our one involving one of my favorite matches of all time, Kenta versus Low Key. Oh, can't miss that one. Very, very excited to talk about it. All right, guys, but thank you, and let's throw to our Wrestling Art Curator interview. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am very enthused about the gentleman that I have on the line as we speak. This bloke is actually someone who I've looked up to for quite a while from a wrestling art perspective. This gentleman's an incredibly talented artist, writer, and curator. Someone who, to me, really defines the richness and like wide open possibility of the genre of this whole wrestling art thing for me. a dude of many solo exhibitions and published in a whole variety of respected periodicals, and a gentleman who's even curated a wrestling art exhibition titled WrestleMANIA late last year at the Rockhampton Museum of Art, where he's also currently the director. Jonathan McBurnie, welcome to the show.
Wow, thank you very much. That's quite the introduction.
I try. How's it going, man?
Very well, very well. How about yourself?
Yeah, good. I honestly, like I said, I'm just stoked to get to do this, to be able to have this kind of chat. Like, honestly, this whole wrestling art podcast is such a self-serving thing for me in that I have this, this interest that I feel like in my general life, it appeals to very few people in the same way, So just getting to like share that kind of passion and talk about this kind of stuff, it's honestly just such a treat.
I'm very happy to be part of your support group.
That's a good definition for it, I'd say. So I mean, at the start, I mean, a good starting point, I kind of like to talk to people about both their art journey as well as the wrestling art journey.
Sure.
So for you, where did it all start for each of those things? I know I've heard you mention that both of your parents are artists themselves.
That's right, yeah. My mum and dad actually both lectured art as well. So I was sort of I really grew up in that kind of context. One of my grandmothers was a commercial artist in her younger years. Her second husband was a caricaturist. I've got a billion aunts that are either artists or art teachers or both. It was just always around, I suppose. My brother's a video editor, so he's kind of got that bug as well. So it was just sort of fairly normal in my family. We all seem to grow up to be either some combination of artists, teachers, or like some sort of rogue like engineer or farmer or combination hybrid. It's a very strange family, which I love.
That is tremendous. I mean, for myself, as it's always been a mystery as to where the art leanings come from. It's so interesting for me to talk to someone who's like got, basically everything was decided out of the cradle.
Yeah, in my family, if you wanted to rebel, you became a lawyer or an architect or something like that, something respectable,
I love that. So tell me, where did the wrestling come into with this?
Well, look, I'm one of those people of a particular vintage, and I feel very lucky for it in that I grew up really like I was a kid during the 80s sort of golden age of WWF. And I think that in a way that was the ideal age to be around for that particular period because it was so kind of over the top and cartoonish, and they really were kind of superheroes, like before the Tim Burton Batman film, we had Christopher Reeves, and that was really about it. We had the old Adam West Batman, we had Christopher Reeves Superman. If you wanted superheroes, you kind of went to wrestling or cartoons.
Yeah.
But then again, that lucky age, I was a teenager when we had the Monday Night Wars with WWF and WCW, and I think again, being a teenager for that particular period of time was just perfect. You could get in on the irony, you could get in on the jokes, and there was a lot of tongue-in-cheek silliness going on as well, which I really enjoyed. So it was just sort of very present in my life in those formative years. And later, probably 20 years ago now, God, when I began seriously pursuing artistic practice and exhibiting and all of that sort of thing, I would find that they'd pop in to my work from time to time, particularly your kind of icons, I guess you could call them, of wrestling, the ones that people recognize even if they're not into wrestling. They'd be really good kind of touchstones for people to connect with your work. But it was more recent that I kind of got into wrestling in a deeper way in terms of self-expression. Actually 20 years ago this year, was it this year? Yeah, 20 years ago this year, I was diagnosed with leukemia. So I had quite a big year of treatment and all of that sort of thing. Sorry to go into such a long story, but
no, please. This is the stuff I live for. Like, I find that people's personal stories. This is the good stuff. So please.
So that unfortunately led into a hip condition called avascular necrosis. One of the drugs basically broke down the hip joint, my right hip joint. And so what that led into was a sort of, there was pain right from, I've been dealing with some level of pain since age 20 or 21 related to that. But in the last 5 years or 6 years, it really started to get fairly profoundly difficult just to get around. And, toward the end I was using walking stick and plenty of painkillers and all of that sort of stuff. And it was during that period that coincidentally, I was getting really sick of a lot of sort of superhero-y stuff. It's just, I grew up on it and I do love it. I love comics, obsessed with comics. But a lot of the kind of the Marvel films and all of that, it's really kind of, for me, it's sapped a lot of the enjoyment out of it because we're getting a lot of very samey kind of product and it just feels so commercial.
Oh man, preaching to the choir there.
So that kind of coincided with me looking for something that I could speak to my own experience with. And, it was at that time I was just starting to really look back and look at, okay, why were these things so fascinating? What is it about wrestling that is so bizarre and unique and captivating? And apart from the art form that it is, and I do consider wrestling an art form rather than a sport or an entertainment. But beyond that, getting into the stories of the wrestlers and the self-medication and the injuries and this kind of crazy psychology behind it, it became sort of a neat way of speaking about my own experience without actually speaking about my experience.
Right.
I'm not one for straight autobiography myself. I'm not really comfortable doing, say, a self-portrait or, woe be unto me kind of stuff. But hey, if it's Andre the Giant, I'm absolutely happy to go there, So
Yeah.
It's sort of, it provided a way of speaking about some things that were at that time particularly difficult for me. Like I look back now at the last maybe 2 or 3 years of pain medication, and it was just like, ooh, I'm very, very happy to not have to deal with that anymore.
Oh man, absolutely. That stuff can be a dangerous road for sure.
For sure. And, to get to the end of that story, I actually had my hip replaced March last year, about a week after. Actually, it was 3 days after we launched Rockhampton Museum of Art to the public. I was like, okay, see you later. I'll be back in 3 weeks with my new hip.
Wow.
So it was quite the whirlwind.
Man, that was that a time of kind of, I guess that was something you've been working up to quite a while. My ex-girlfriend actually had a similar thing where she had her hip replaced, and I know that the journey up to that point, and then when she finally got it done, I think it was quite a big moment for her of almost like celebration as much as it's a
Absolutely.
difficult thing. So how was that for you?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. It was like, I mean, not to whinge too much, but the last sort of 4 or 5 years were pretty tough.
Yeah.
And then to suddenly wake up, and even though you're hooked up to an IV and you've got medication in you, there's a sort of almost a passive pain, a static pain in the background that you're just used to, and suddenly you wake up and that's not even there. Wow. And it's just like, what a wonderful feeling. And you haven't even stood up yet, you haven't even had to be on your feet for 2 hours, which used to, if I was on my feet for 2 hours, for example, doing an exhibition opening or something, the next day was basically I'm out, I'm at home on painkillers just to sort of recover from that. It was at that stage. So yeah, absolutely a celebration. And it's amazing how fast you recover from that operation after such a long period of sort of going through the pain and all of that. So it was a wonderful thing.
Oh, that's fantastic to hear. You mentioned about the idea of, if you're not necessarily comfortable or the kind of person that would be shouting your story from the rooftops, and being able to sort of like put that through the lens of a wrestler. I find that quite fascinating, because at the end of the day, that's kind of a big part of the art form. It's about that sort of like almost that role playing characters that people can kind of relate to and put themselves into the shoes of what they're watching.
Absolutely. The art world is a funny kind of world. It gets, the people in there have very specific ideas about what is and isn't art, and that's fine. I've got no problem with that. But I'm someone that's never particularly fit in with that. I've always done comics as well and written, and I just do whatever I feel like, really. So I never quite feel like I belong to any of those worlds particularly. But that's okay. And the wrestler thing, I mean, there is an element of feeling like that there's a bit of a misfit element or an outsider element, I find, to a lot of wrestlers. You sort of read about them or listen to interviews and things, and it's always, oh yeah, I was 6 feet tall when I was 10 years old, or like getting teased mercilessly for being different, or I wasn't good at this, and there's always that aspect of just being different. They were either the class nerd, or they were the troublemaker, or trying to get that attention. And I think there's something of that outsider or individualist that you just can't help but gravitate to, and I think a lot of people do gravitate to that. For me too, there's a sort of I guess a physical aspect as well. Like, not that I'm as huge as some of these wrestlers, but I'm 6'5" or something, and I was a big kid. I was taller than the other kids, and overweight, acne, all the rest of it. And man, oh man, you get absolutely made to suffer for being different. And so, wrestling is something. It's like, there are guys out there who have made a huge name for themselves, and they're big, chunky, 6'5" or bigger people, and there's something sort of, I don't know, there's something comforting in that.
For sure. I think a massive like strength and power in seeing someone turn something that you could feel be made to feel ashamed of, and then someone's like using that as like everyone's like fawning over like Andre the Giant or whatever.
Yeah, it's I was always fascinated by the big guys, like I mean, obviously Andre's story is quite remarkable. But there's a whole bunch of them that God, just the injuries that some of them, like I was thinking of Psycho Sid the other day, and
Oh, man.
God, some of the injuries he went through, and Big Van Vader, and oh my God.
One of the most grotesque injuries I've ever seen in my life, that Sid one. My gosh.
I must have seen a YouTube clip or something, and it reminded me, and it went, and that would put you out for a year or something.
I mean, that basically ended his entire career.
Yeah, terrible.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so something that you just said, that sort of high and low culture of like the art world meets the wrestling thing. I find it endlessly fascinating too. I think what you mentioned as well about has been, for me as well, there was always something a little bit sort of off-putting about that kind of like hoity-toityness of the contemporary art scene, to where I almost tried to avoid it for a long time. But it doesn't necessarily, it's not like that. Like, there is obviously good.
We have a challenge, I think, particularly in Australia. And that challenge is that, well, it's twofold. Part of it is that the art scene here is actually so tiny if you compare it to some of the markets in America, Europe, Asia. We are this tiny, tiny, tiny little speck of a market. We've got not a great arts infrastructure in terms of supporting. You're supported, I think, if you're the upper tier blue chip, and you're supported as a sort of a hot young emerging artist. But there's not much else that goes on. It can be a bit of a no man's land between those two areas, and that's partly due to just the size of, we don't have the population to support a huge art market. It's just the reality of it. And the other part of it is we are miles away from all of these bigger art markets. Probably the closest are some of the bigger markets in Singapore and Japan, places like that. But it's not, you wouldn't call it readily accessible. And I think that has a big effect on it as well. And the unfortunate side effect of that is a kind of a territorial aspect, a clannish aspect with certain cliques and certain, not everyone does it. I've met some amazingly generous and supportive artists in my time, but you do sometimes come up against a sort of an invisible barrier that's, quite arbitrary often. Often it's just based on one gallerist's taste, or I'm into geometric abstraction, I'm not really into figurative, or I'm into figurative, I don't like. Quite arbitrary taste matters. And it took me a while to sort of become okay with that, but I have a day job, I work hard at it, and so I don't have the pressure to be selling in order to get by. And so I make work just for me, really. And the fact that people enjoy it and attend things I put on it's a real compliment, and I'm glad for it. I'm glad to have that platform.
I think that's the very best thing that possibly can exist. Can be quite similar to where I basically tell people I make art for myself, and art that appeals to me first and foremost. And then if other people dig it, then that's cool. And then sort of I've been surprised that that there are other people that kind of dig it. But I mean, sort of getting back to that kind of like contemporary art kind of scene. At least for myself, I always thought that kind of more lowbrow kind of stuff, more culty, or I mean wrestling really is just lowbrow pop culture at the end of the day, to where I think I was a little bit thinking, the contemporary art scene is not really the vibe for that kind of stuff. So then finding other sort of like avenues to reach an audience, and even going abroad. I find for me most of my business comes from America, which I guess isn't that much of a surprise with the popularity of of wrestling over there. But no,
Mm.
I just find it quite an interesting thing, that like merging of lowbrow stuff in a especially in like a gallery kind of setting. And the thing that really intrigues me, so I'm interested in your thoughts on this. For me, it's always such a fun conversation. I stress the word fun, with inverted commas, when I'll have people completely outside the wrestling world, work colleagues or whatever. They hear that I, do art. Oh, what kind of art? And I tell them, oh yeah, mostly of the, sweaty, bulbous men in lycra variety. And it always is kind of either like you get oh yeah, I used to know a bit about wrestling or whatever, or just like it's such a fast conversation ender. Just like that, I have no even relation point to that. So I mean, how does that work for you? Do you have many of those kind of fun conversations on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, it can be quite interesting. I wouldn't say a day-to-day basis, but it's an interesting one in that just thinking about what you just said, I wonder whether it's actually not got, I wonder whether it's not to do with the wrestling itself that these people suddenly switch off. I wonder whether it is actually because you are responding to something that clearly means something to you, which can be a bit of a no-no in contemporary art, to reveal too much of oneself without enough screens and barriers and red herrings and all the rest. And I'm so guilty of that myself. I wonder if it's just like, whoa, we're dealing with really out there, challenging, bizarre concepts of masculinity, of the physical self, of gender, of the body. Whoa, I can't deal with that. I'm going back to my hard edge abstraction or whatever. You know what I mean? I wonder if it's something like that. Like it's like overloading the circuits of certain people,
Yeah.
Where's my paintings of clouds or birds or what am I, I need a concept, I need an essay to accompany this work and tell me what to think of it,
I mean, that's quite fascinating.
Yeah, people can get scared of things that are too close or too personal, in the art world anyway.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. For a world that's supposedly built on self-expression, we can all be awfully uptight with expressing those things.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, because the concept relating back to all those things that you just mentioned of body image, of masculinity, of like toxic masculinity, of different cultural tropes, of all of this kind of interesting stuff. Like, it's all there, but I guess in a way it's a little bit beneath the surface.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, I guess, what I find so interesting about, like, yeah, I make art of wrestling oftentimes, but it's more than just painting a wrestling match of whatever. It's more about what that particular moment means, relating to this more murky, interesting, gritty, cool stuff beneath the surface.
Yeah, it's there can be a lot to it. One of the artists that I curated into the WrestleMANIA exhibition, and you probably know his work, Ed Luce, who's a fantastic cartoonist,
Yes,
queer cartoonist. We did a podcast discussing his work, and for him, wrestling actually took on quite a beyond his comics. It actually took on a fairly profound place in his life. He sort of figured out his sexuality through seeing wrestling on TV and figuring out that he was actually incredibly attracted to the Anvil, Neidhart, of the Hart Foundation,
right.
Bret Hart's, brother-in-law or whatever.
Yeah.
He was just like, who is this hunk of man? And it totally changed his life when he was quite young. And I just find that amazing.
That is amazing.
Yeah, like it was this total perspective shift, and it's sort of been, wrestling's obviously his comic is about wrestling and heavy metal, and God, what a great combination, and complete change in his life, his whole identity. It's quite amazing, I find.
Man, absolutely. I mean, the whole sort of outsider side of it, and the weirdos, and the almost like one of my favorite terms that I find endlessly fascinating about wrestling is that of the carny.
Yeah.
And it's just these outsiders of society, and especially like getting back to your more kind of like territory kind of wrestling, your classic stuff back in the day, the idea of oftentimes these guys, being on the run from the law, they'll go from one territory to another to escape like some sort of charge that they've got against them. Just a Wild West world that I find so intriguing, and that was, I guess, something about your art, specifically of your wrestling art, that I found so fascinating. It was the stuff, I guess, we have a bit in common of the weird shit,
And there is an abundance of weirdness in wrestling, and strange stories and unsolved mystery kind of stuff. I do love the traveling roadshow aspect of wrestling. You still get. I mean, it's starting to change a little bit, I think, in the last 20 years, but even in the 80s and 90s, you still got a lingering sense of that. We'll be in this town tonight, tomorrow night we'll be in that town, the next night we'll be in that big stadium over there. And just that constant kind of racking up the miles. And it was really like that for 100, 150 years, And I think that also speaks to why wrestling is still such a prevalent sort of entertainment, particularly in the southern states of the USA and Mexico and South America, because that was the stomping ground of these troops, I guess you could call them, wrestling troops. And you had this sort of the carnival and the sideshow and the freak show and all of that, moving around together. And I think a lot of people also don't quite realize the impact of that had on the theater of everything, and that does linger to this day, is the theater of, okay, we've got your attention for maybe 10 seconds. We've got 10 seconds to get you in. And that translates to television as well. We've got 10, 20 seconds to capture your attention. You're the villain. I'm the hero. I'm the baby face. We have to get that across really quick in really broad strokes and lure you in. And I that's such a format, it's such a formula that is still, like, they still have to work that, because I mean, now it's a shorter attention span than ever. If you want to capture someone's attention, you've got to really kind of get them there and then.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, because it's sort of like there's a lot of differences in the sort of modern wrestling, like you're saying, shorter attention span, but also more people kind of like in the know and knowing what to expect, knowing what this is. So it gets a lot more kind of tricky and I guess like the more behind the scenes side and all that kind of thing, where there's a real magic that I love about, especially like your 80s and 70s kind of wrestling, where it's exactly like you're saying. It's like the carnival. It's like you've almost got the guy on the microphone trying to talk people into the building, and that's the same way that you'd watch these promos from like a Dusty Rhodes or a Ric Flair, and it's like you can actually see them talking them into the building, and it's just that part of it. I hate to be the guy that's like, it used to be better back then. I don't want to be that out of touch kind of guy, but there was such a lost magic about it in that period, and I think that really attracts me as an artist in a big way.
Absolutely. It did, revealing kayfabe, I suppose, if we can call it revealing that, or destroying kayfabe. I don't know what the official way of recognizing that is, but that point at which kayfabe was sort of let go of, what a huge paradigm shift it must have been. I mean, again, look at that sort of 90s stuff, the Monday Night Wars. A lot of those cracks were starting to happen then, and more and more wrestlers actually openly talking about behind the scenes kind of stuff and breaking kayfabe.
Well, there was that Vince McMahon promo, wasn't it,
Yeah.
in the early 90s, where he came
That's
out and
right.
basically told everyone, hey, this is a work, just want to make sure we don't have to pay these taxes anymore.
That's right, yeah, for tax purposes. So very, very interesting. But it definitely did change the dynamic for the viewer in a very, very big way, because, I mean, even back, I've seen newspaper articles from the 20s where they're like questioning, that was a bit fake, like they're questioning it, but the wrestlers are all still holding up.
Yeah. I mean, there were big exposés at the time back
Yeah.
then. I
Yeah.
remember reading in Lou Thesz's book, there were various exposés and things like that, where even at his time, this wasn't seen by and large as being on the level by most of society. It was always seen as kind of a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I guess it just became a bit more overt as time went on.
Yeah, absolutely. But now, I mean, there's no real denying it now, unless you were like a kid and you hadn't been kind of wised up yet by your dad or whatever. There's not really any way around that. But in a way, like for me as an artist, that adds a wrinkle that is quite interesting in terms of, okay, what are we watching here? And, the only parallels I've been able to find in other art forms and popular culture to wrestling in this way, in terms of the spectator and their part in the drama, two parallels I've been able to find or think of. One is some forms of theatre, only some forms of theatre. The other is pornography.
Right.
And let me just explain what I mean by that. You as the viewer or the audience member, you are in on this thing. So you know that they are performing for you. So let's just, whether it's porn stars, wrestlers, or some actors, theatre actors, let's just call them performers. You know that there's a sort of, they've probably worked out a beginning, a middle, and an end. They'll probably stick to that, although one of them might make a choice at the end and go rogue and surprise everyone, including their fellow performers. You know what I mean? So there's a sort of a winking participation both by the performers and the audiences. And that's a really interesting dynamic to play with.
I love that so much.
And it does sit in some theatre as well, but it's harder to find that. Like I liken it to commedia dell'arte, which is similar to wrestling in that the characters are preset. There's like 4 or 5 rote characters, and in the old days, when it was a very popular form, the different actors could alternate between the different roles just according to what they felt that night. They got the mask for Dottore or whoever, and that was their role for the night, and they could riff on that and play into that. And I do think that does have a continuity into like vaudeville and all of that stuff and wrestling. So there's not as much of that sort of thing as there used to be, but it does still exist. And there is a sort of a participatory aspect for the audience, and it's the same with wrestling, and it's the same with pornography.
Yeah,
and they're the only kind of parallels I've been able to find that require that amount of kind of, okay, I know this isn't real, but I'm going along with it, and I'm going to enjoy myself at the same time. You know what I mean? It's a really interesting dynamic.
So good. I mean, it's all the illusion, right? Like,
Yeah.
And the audience, like you're saying, agreeing to participate in the illusion and that suspension of disbelief. That's the whole magic, and I think you're right with like both of those other mediums. You do have various ones where these I guess art forms, develop over time and get a bit more like, okay, everyone's in on the joke. Let's just, you real like gonzo kind of stuff when it comes to like porn, for example. Like, let's just like cut out the whole story.
Gonzo is a great term that could be applied to wrestling or pornography or all sorts of things, and is applied to those things very often.
Yeah, like your Hunter S. Thompson. Did he actually come up with the term gonzo?
I believe so. I don't know if he coined it himself or if other people did to describe his form of sort of journalism. But yes, in one way or the other, yes. I'm actually, as you said that, I looked over to my bookshelf and saw my big Ralph Steadman book, and I thought, what timing?
Oh man, I love Ralph Steadman's art so much. I'm actually currently reading Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
Oh, fantastic!
And the Steadman artwork throughout is just so great.
Yeah, he's wonderful. I highly recommend his autobiography. It's a lot of fun.
Ooh, I'll definitely have to check that out for sure.
It's called The Joke's Over.
Joke's Over?
I think that's it. The Joke's Over. That's what it's called.
Okay, cool. I'll be sure to check that out. So I think that's an interesting thing, even in like the way wrestling looks and feels now, in that I think a lot of your more fast-paced kind of stuff, a lot of the more, all right, let's get rid of the gaga and the story and the heel face stuff as much and go more towards just let's do all these crazy high spots and, impressive kind of shit that, I mean, I love that kind of stuff too. But it's just so fascinating how all of these art forms we're talking about, theatre, but I think it also extends to film as well, where you have some that are, have more of a realistic vibe, but they all require the audience to kind of participate in this illusion. I just find it's so fascinating that all these art forms have gone on a similar trajectory, but I guess nothing changes forever. Like, you can always go full circle. You can always go back to that, early approach and what's old is new. And I think that's absolutely for wrestling as well.
Well, and I've certainly been reading about a lot of smaller promotions in the USA and Mexico and also in Japan that are sort of going back to that real grassroots sort of approach. And they are re-embracing kayfabe. That's how they approach it. There is a sort of, a bit of a hard style in what they're doing. To those of you that I don't mean to condescend, but if you're not aware of hard style, it's kind of when, the hits, there might be a few actual punches in there and a few potatoes. Some of the wrestling can get a bit rough. Just sorry to, really don't mean to condescend. But I have read more and more about those sorts of things.
No, I absolutely love that stuff, and on a regular basis, we'll just lean way into that, maybe a little bit too much sometimes.
Yeah, well, I think that's why Big Van Vader is one of my favorite wrestlers, maybe my very favorite wrestler. He's amazing to draw, but you watch the poor bastards that he's wrestling with, and you can see that he really gets into them sometimes, and there's sort of the expressions are like, you feel a bit bad for some of them. Mick Foley in particular.
My gosh, it's so funny you say, oh man, tremendous. But it's funny you say that, Vader of all people. I was literally just this afternoon watching a really great highlight video that quite a talented wrestling video editor, a dude called IQ Wrestler, put together on Big Van Vader.
Oh, I'll have to.
Man, I was watching this about 8.5 minute video, and it's just tremendous stuff. I'll send you a link.
Please.
But just seeing some of this, physicality, as we're saying, and the best part was that it's not like he would just, take it out on the jobbers or the enhancement talent and then go light on the top guys. He was a equal punisher of all alike. I saw some amazing clips of him just beating the shit out of like Antonio Inoki, Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan. Tremendous.
Oh, and he was a meat axe. Like, God, just a big solid chunk of human flesh. Just astonishing.
Yeah, so great. He's also one of my favorites to draw, personally speaking. But so that's something I wanted to talk about as well. So I have gone through a fair bit of your stuff. I wanted to say massive thank you for sending over those books. And I've also been, looking through a bit of the stuff on your website and your Instagram, and just some tremendous stuff. But there's certain characters that keep popping back up that I'm noticing throughout your work. Obviously, Vader being a key one of them, and my gosh, I just got so much joy of just really looking at some of those, and that's just a testament. Like, a dude like Vader is that kind of freakish, like, just someone off the street looks at this guy and they're like, what am I even looking at here?
I'll tell you why certain characters do appear more and more. There's two main reasons. One is just if they're good to draw, there's certain physical types that are just wonderful to draw. Hulk Hogan, you mentioned before, great to draw. And I like drawing him in all his various states, even his sort of older states. I really like drawing. There's a match. It might have been the last match he and Ric Flair had and they're getting on close to retirement at that stage, and they're still muscular, but they're sort of.
I had this on my list of things to talk about.
But their flesh is sort of starting to sag a little, and there's wrinkles here and there, but there's still these sort of muscles trying to poke through. Just amazing to see that. Like, it's not something you really see very often outside of like Iggy Pop or someone like that, So there's a I love drawing mass and form and really trying to emphasize the weight of these characters. But the other thing I'm very drawn to is tragedy. I'm very attracted to the tragedy of some wrestlers because some of their stories are legitimately heartbreaking. And I find that really, like, you just can't help but kind of gravitate toward those stories. So they're the two things I seem to go back to again and again, sometimes together, sometimes separately.
Yeah, it's funny you say tragedy when it comes to wrestling, because obviously wrestling has had its fair share of tragedies, but also like in some ways, I feel like the true story of a wrestler, if we're summing up your general wrestler of all of the different generations or whatnot, it is a tragedy more often than not. With just these highest peaks of fame and working to this place that is not sustainable in any sense, and a brief time in the spotlight, and then such a downward slip down that slope afterwards. Obviously seen it with a lot of different real wrestling stories too. I was a massive fan of the Darren Aronofsky's The Wrestler movie with Mickey Rourke, and I'm so excited about this new Von Erichs movie for that same reason. But there's something in it, isn't it, about the tragedy of the wrestler?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what are we, 4 seasons deep in the Dark Side of the Ring now, and they could make another 4 seasons easily.
Oh, I love that series so much.
Oh, it's amazing. But it does make you realize how exploitative it could be, because we're really talking about sort of an industry, I suppose, that sort of routinely exploited the working class and people that didn't have any other option but to lean in on their unique physical attributes and just sort of mine that for all they could.
Man, exactly what you're saying just is screaming to me is the current version of a circus freak show. you know, of
Mm,
people who have
mm,
no option but to go on this traveling show to exploit their you know, physical attributes,
mm.
and about them being exploited by the promoter at its very core.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the 80s and 90s was a really interesting period in that way, because in the 80s you sort of saw the last lingering bits of that old school, you know, that old school kayfabe traveling roadshow kind of thing. And then in the 90s, you saw it slowly being dismantled and turned into something, you know, sort of shiny and contemporary.
Mm.
Um, and I think that was a really exciting 20 years of wrestling to see. Um, it's quite a different beast now. I mean, you know, not to complain too much, there is there are some wrestlers that I will still pay attention to now, and you know, I think there's other opportunities now outside of like WWF, and for a while WCW used to be just this sort of monolith of wrestling culture, but seems like there's a lot more options now, and like New Japan are doing amazing things, and you know, that's really great to see. But also one thing I do really appreciate is the push of women's wrestling
Mm.
in the last 10 years. Just amazing stuff. Like, I always felt like there were bits and pieces of that here and there, but you know, it really sort of cooled off by the 90s. I don't know, they just weren't doing very much of it.
It was almost like
It was
they
sort of this
had
TNA fest, you know.
they had this great like time of so many really talented women's wrestlers, especially in the early 90s to mid 90s. If you've ever watched any of the Japanese women's wrestling from like the 80s and 90s, just some of the best wrestling, full stop, regardless of gender, that you'll ever see in your life. And WWF, I remember in the 90s, was actually doing some super interesting stuff with like Alundra Blaze, and she was getting to work with like some of these great Japanese wrestling female opponents. I remember they even brought over like Aja Kong. And then it was almost like this weird bit where I think there was a match where Aja Kong wrestled Alundra Blaze, and it was so physical and, you know, everything that I love about an Aja Kong match, that I think that I remember reading somewhere that Vince saw that and was like, oh, that's not what we want to present here. That's
really?
not what people want out of, you know, their women's wrestling. They just, you know, want hot chicks, and then that's how we ended the evolution into Tammy Sitch, Sunny, and Sable, and all of that.
Yeah, Sable and Sunny. Yeah, that's right. Which is so sad, because there was so much talent around. Like, I was thinking of Lita the other day. God, she was an amazing acrobat. Amazing.
So
like
unique.
Yeah, but she would have fit right in with contemporary women's wrestling. Like, some of those people can, God, just astonishing stuff.
Yeah.
Astonishing acrobatics and physicality, you know.
Yeah, it makes me very happy. Like, as much as it is a bit of doom and gloom, and sometimes it's not what it was, or blah blah blah, but there is a lot of good things about current wrestling, and I think you're right. Like the positioning of female wrestling, you know, I being positioned in the main event more often, I think is a great thing too. I watched a Ring of Honor show this past year, since it's been under you know, Tony Khan and AEW ownership. And they had a main event of Willow Nightingale against Athena, and that just absolutely blew me away for how great it was, but also seeing the positioning of like two African American women as well being spotlighted in the main event, I thought was a fantastic thing. So I think there is a lot of great stuff going on too.
Yeah, I mean, that's one area that I think WWE, I guess we're calling them now, have really redeemed themselves in the last 10 years is with the women. Like, it's remarkable. Like, that's actually, if I'm watching contemporary wrestling, that tends to be what I'm usually watching, just because of who they've got these days and the level of talent, you know.
Yeah, I find it really interesting that I think the person that inspired all of this, at least for this current women's wrestling boom, that I feel doesn't get enough credit in a big way is Ronda Rousey. I
For
feel like
sure.
what she did in UFC and even getting women's fighting on that, spotlight position, and then for, Vince to be like, oh, there's money to be made here.
Yeah, no, Rousey is amazing. Yeah, there's some real, like, I will watch just about anything with her in it. Charlotte Flair, like, amazing kind of charismatic character, great villain, great heel. I love Rhea Ripley. Like, I just absolutely, as soon as I saw her, I was like, who the hell is that? And I don't think I've drawn her yet, but I must.
Ooh, that'd be super interesting.
Oh, she's just a tank. And
in a lot of ways, kind of like a current version of China, I feel.
Yeah. But also very charismatic, and like she's a good talker and all that. And I love that she's Australian as well. That's really fun.
Yeah, the Australian thing's quite fascinating to me, because I was thinking about this, and from no actual planning of this wrestling art podcast for these curator episodes that I'm doing, the first artist that I had on was Sam Evans, also an Australian artist from
I've listened to that one. Yeah.
Oh, nice. But then the second guest, also Australian. Is there like some sort of hub for wrestling art going on here? I don't know.
Well, yeah, I'll see if I can get you and Ed talking. I'm sure he'd love to have a chat.
I would love that. I think that'd be
and he's
great.
the loveliest guy. Very generous. Ed is. Yeah.
Oh, I would love that. That'd be fantastic. I mean, the Australian thing, I think, is fascinating, because in a big way of thinking about it, professional wrestling is more of an American, pop culture export, I guess. In Australia, I mean, probably before our day, we actually had an amazing history of professional wrestling over here with Jim Barnett's World Championship Wrestling, doing that loop of all the big cities every week, but basically the biggest wrestling territory in the world at the time, business-wise. And then it kind of fell off. And in a big way, Australian wrestling kind of lost any sense of identity.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of became, all right, when are the Americans coming to town? And
it is nice seeing all these grassroots promotions happening, though, in the last sort of 10 years. Like, I've been absolutely loving that. There's some really, really talented wrestlers here in Rockhampton. Before I was here, I was in Townsville. There's some great stuff happening in Townsville, and they're the ones I've seen, but I know that there are others happening all over the place, which is just fantastic.
Yeah, it's definitely getting more of a spotlight now than it has in a long, long time. And some Australians abroad, like you're saying, between Ray Ripley or a whole variety of different wrestlers, with Jonah Rock or Bronson Reed, I think he's wrestling as in WWE, the TMDK boys, so many dudes doing so much great stuff on the big stage overseas. I think it's a fantastic thing. But so you mentioned about the Rockhampton scene. I'm very fascinated about this. So I mentioned in the intro the wrestling art show that you put together. Now, you sent me some pictures of this, and I am so incredibly jealous I didn't get to see this in person. This looked like it was absolutely amazing. So you curated the whole thing.
Yeah.
Before we finish off, I kind of want to know a bit about that. But getting into it, you actually had some live wrestling there as part of it.
We did.
How did this come together?
Well, I knew I hadn't been here very long when I booked this exhibition, and I thought, gee, we need some live wrestling, at least for the launch, So I asked around, and everyone was, oh yeah, there's this live wrestling group here. At that time, they'd broken off from, I think, the QWA, and wanted to go independent, still work with QWA, but have their own thing going on. And so they were rebranding as Wrestling Allegiance Rockhampton, or WAR, which is a wonderful, wonderful sort of portmanteau for their business. And they've now got the killer logo. Like their logo is the envy of all the other promotions in Queensland, I think. But we were lucky enough to get them with their debut show at our launch. So it was actually the first WAR launch with our exhibition. So basically I said to them, look, you perform at our launch, we'll leave the stage in the gallery, and then you get a show in exchange where you can sell tickets and make some money off it and all of the rest of it. So they did that about a month or two later. And it worked a treat because it was something different. We came up with a great idea to sort of have a bit of kayfabe going on. So one of the artists, Ewan McLeod, he's actually pretty highly regarded Australian artist. He's won just about everything that you can win, including the Archibald. Like, it's ridiculous. I said, I know, I'll talk to Ewan, because I was talking with one of the wrestlers about this, and he said, we should get a crappy painting from Crazy Clark's or something and put it on the wall, and I can smash it over someone's head. And I was like, I'll do you one better. I'll get Ewan to paint something, and I bet he will. I bet he will, and we'll have it on the wall, and it'll be that much more convincing. Can I curse on this podcast?
Yeah, please.
So I ring Ewan. I just wanted to check out. So I ring Ewan up and I say, hey, Ewan, what would you think about just painting something that we can take off the wall and have the wrestlers smash over each other's head? And he just went, oh, fuck yeah. He was so excited by this. Ewan, in a funny way, I'll come back to this, in a funny way, he was sort of responsible for the very early idea of this show, but I'll come back to that. So we had this painting hanging on the wall, and at one point the wrestlers get out of the ring. I think we had 3 or 4 different matches on the first night. The wrestlers get out of the ring, and it was Dante Rage, who's this great local wrestler. He's this meat axe guy. He picked up the painting off of the wall. Now, I hadn't told my whole team about this. I told the install team. The install team knew about it, but everyone else was like, they had no idea what was going to happen. And so when he picked it up off the wall, everyone just gasped collectively. And my boss tells this great story of him being there, and his daughter was there with him, and she's going, Dad. And then into the stage, and they kind of teased it for a while. It was sitting against the ropes for a bit, and then it got banged around. Everyone's sort of relaxing a bit, and then finally he picked it up, boom, over the head of the other wrestler. And everyone just, again, sort of, there were a few screams and a gasp or two, because it was great. It had a label on the wall and everything, you know.
Oh my gosh.
And then at the end of the night, because it was the last match from memory, one of the wrestlers kind of gingerly went and sort of hung it back on the wall in tatters. And we left it there, you know, for the duration. And a number of people came to the front desk through the show and said, "Oh, just so you know, there's an artwork there that's been a bit damaged. You know, we think there's been a bit of vandalization. You know." So it worked a treat.
Oh my gosh, isn't that the definition of performance art right there?
Yeah, like, it couldn't have gone any better. It was a lot of fun. So we had 20 artists, and, you know, they responded to all sorts of different aspects of wrestling, from, you know, the theatrical to gender to the physicality to the nostalgia. It was just a really, really fun show. It was wonderful to be a part of it. I was saying earlier, Ewan was sort of, in a funny way, responsible for the genesis of the show. That was basically, visiting his studio years and years ago. I noticed in there that he had these. He's known for his if you look him up, you probably recognize it. He's known for his very physical, very gestural, thick painting, just so much life in there. Figurative work, figures in landscapes and all sorts. But I noticed they're still there in his studio. He had these maybe 5 or 6 very small paintings of wrestlers, and they were like old school wrestlers, like kind of 50s, 60s, Lou Thesz kind of dudes, like
awesome.
The hairy chests, and they're not like big gym rats. They just look like they work, like they look like they could be on the wharf throwing barrels down, like
classic wrestler.
And I was like, what are they? And he was, just he used to attend wrestling and watch wrestling on TV growing up in New Zealand. And he just always was fascinated by them, but he'd never shown them. And so ever since then, I was like, I've got to figure out a way to show those bloody wrestlers, because they were just, so great. And actually that just jumping back a little, that just reminds me, you mentioned sort of the golden age of wrestling in Australia. One thing that I found out more recently was that my grandfather on my dad's side used to take my dad and my aunties along to the wrestling at Festival Hall when they were really small. Yeah. And
the Brisbane Festival Hall?
Yeah, Brisbane Festival Hall,
I have the same experience of my family members going to Melbourne Festival Hall back in the day, or my granddad going in New Zealand too.
Yeah.
It was huge.
And Dad said, "Oh yeah, I don't remember who we saw, but I know we saw Killer Kowalski." Oh my amazing. God. And so I've got this amazing book. I don't know if you're aware of it. It's a killer. It's called 100 Years of Australian Professional Wrestling. And it's put together by this guy. I think his name is Libnan Ayub. And he is the son of the Sheik, not the Sheik, the very bloody Sheik that we know, but the Australian Sheik. There was an Australian Sheik, or particularly in his dad's case, a Lebanese Australian Sheik, who was a very, very big wrestler here. And so he's compiled this amazing history of Australian wrestling. And I was actually...
I need to get this book.
It's a killer. I was actually in conversation with him to possibly borrow some of his memorabilia for the exhibition. Unfortunately, it didn't pan out, but very lovely guy, very generous and very protective of his father's legacy. But he's sort of a great wrestling historian. Anyway, to connect the dots, I'm sorry I'm going on a bit, that book is also a key book that Ewan McLeod used a lot for his reference images. And he actually did a painting of me as a wrestler, which is on my wall right in front of me.
I need to see this. It'll be comfortable.
It's very funny. I'll send you a picture. So
please.
I'm there in my Speedo and in classic wrestling pose. So it's a joy to have that on the wall.
I am so fascinated by this.
It's fun.
Oh man! Well, I have had such a joy talking to you. I mean, I've got half of the things that I had notes about that we are definitely not going to be able to get to. But honestly, just so much fun to get to talk about this stuff. I'd love in the future to potentially have you on again if you'd be happy to do so.
Anytime.
Awesome. Thank you so much. What would you like to plug here, like from a worker perspective?
Well, I'm always posting on Instagram. I try to put something up every day. So that's Jonathan _McBurnie is the handle. But if you type in Jonathan McBurnie, you'll get it. And I've got all my crap up on my website. What else? I just did a show, so I can't. There's no point telling you about that because it's just come down. But I'm always keeping pretty busy, so there'll be. Oh, that's what I can promote. Got a book that came out very recently on comics and literary theory that I co-wrote with Adam Gexy, and that is you can find that on Amazon or at Rutgers University Press. Their website. They've got it on their website. And I do urge you to have a look. I don't get to talk about wrestling too much in that, but I do talk about it a little bit in conjunction with the Hernandez brothers. So I'm sure there's a few people there that might dig that. So please check it out if you're so inclined.
Yeah, for sure. I was actually taking a look at the book and doing a little bit of research for the interview, and I was quite fascinated because I do share a bit of your, I wouldn't say to the same level, a bit of a passion for comics and I guess the place of comics, similar to what we're talking about with wrestling, compared to other art forms and examining it as its own sort of art form, really. So yeah, I'd definitely like to take a bit more of a look at that.
Yeah, it's nice to be, in a way, it's nice to be disregarded as an art form because I feel like you get away with a bit more.
Yeah, I think so. And it also makes it so much more fun for us to be able to use it as subject matter, where we come and be like, oh, all of these fun, weird outcasts of of fine art that we can bring back in under the guise of outsider art, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, imagine if we could get, Big Van Vader or Mick Foley or someone like that painting. I don't know. I think we'd see some wonderful things.
Oh, I hope so. Finishing up, I do have one question. I think I now know the answer to it. But this is one I want to start, asking everybody when I have them on. But hand to heart, who is your favorite wrestler to draw?
Or to draw, I'd have to go with Big Van Vader. I think.
Nice.
I'd have to go with Big Van Vader. Yeah, just such a meat axe. Like he's got that combination of sort of bulk and muscle. Like it's not that gym muscle. It's just like
man muscle,
brute strength. He looks like one of those guys. Yeah, who's the guy, the Mountain? He played the Mountain on Game of Thrones, and he's
yeah.
Does those crazy, ridiculous strongman competitions where they're like lugging logs and huge boulders around and all that ridiculous stuff. That's what I love when they're just like this sort of slab. None of this constructed, perfect gym stuff. I like the meat axes.
Me too. I feel like wrestling going forward, we need to disregard, get away from the abs, get back to the girthy, just big old boys.
Yeah, I love is it what's that guy's name? I love Braun Strowman. He's a contemporary guy. He's great. He's just like this massive redneck bloody meat axe. He's hilarious.
Tremendous.
Great. I need to draw him too. I've got all these people I need to draw now.
Oh, please. I want to see it. And I want to give props to that. Absolutely incredible. There's an artwork that you did of Vader covered in the crimson mask. Oh, it just brought me so much joy and captured so much of that whole physicality and gruesomeness and just all about it.
Oh, thank you very much. That's a recent one. Thank you very much.
Oh, very welcome. But no, thanks again. And yeah, I hope you have a great evening, and it's been a pleasure to chat with you.
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, dude. Cheers. Oh my gosh, that was just so nice. Just a delight, and really what I kind of what I was hoping that this podcast would be. I don't know where else I would get to have that kind of like philosophical chat about wrestling art as a medium. Man, just so happy. I hope you guys enjoyed that as much as I did. It was bloody lovely, man. Massive, massive thank you to Jonathan McBurnie there. Just would definitely have to get him on. My word. But we do have some plugs, excuse of my own, to get to here. So as always, you can keep up with all of the things of wrestling art on the socials at Chris Things on both Instagram and Twitter for all the updates about the show. Instagram also has a variety of my own wrestling art that you can check out. There's also christhings.com.au, my website, where you'll be able to actually purchase a whole bunch of my work and just check it out. Have a little gander, shit. We've got some prints, we've got some original artwork, we've got calendars, all sorts of stuff. But I truly appreciate you guys for listening to the show, for supporting in any way that you choose to. You guys doing that, is basically in encouraging and supporting the creation of more batshit weird nonsense art of my own, of the wrestling variety often. So yeah, I just want to say a massive thank you. If you're digging the podcast, I certainly appreciate that as well. You can please make sure if you can that you subscribe to the Chris Things Wrestling Art with Chris Things channel. If you feel like it, leave a review. That helps apparently. But also, if you're digging it, I mean, I don't know what friends that you might have that might be into this thing, but if you possibly do have that very specific type of friend that might do wrestling art, please, why not tell them about this podcast? I'd certainly appreciate that. More ear holes on this thing is definitely a good deal. But yeah, I honestly just want to thank you for your loyalty and tuning in and listening to this stuff, because I'm certainly having a lot of fun, and hopefully we can do a bit more. But no, that's about it. Massive thank you, guys. We will plan to have more of these Wrestling Art Curator episodes interspliced in the near future, in addition to our more regular Match of the Week episodes. And like I said on the other episode, I think even getting some workers on, some wrestlers on, to talk about wrestling art from a wrestler perspective. I think that'll be super interesting too. So stay tuned, big things ahead. But yeah, thanks again, guys, and I will see you very soon for our Match of the Week episode.
The hammerlocks.
Guys, bye.
I do the